And welcome back, folks, to Truth versus News here on December 2nd. We've got lots to cover here as we get close to the end of the year. And Jim Fetcher, the most dangerous man in America, and Scott Bennett covered it all so well. You just ought to pay attention and share this with your friends and family and everywhere on the net. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, Don, this is an absolutely sensational story that really gives you the deep understanding of what's been going on here. Scott Ritter lays out the gravity of the case. He will present in 3 paragraphs. The whistleblower complaint has opened a window into the politicalization of the intelligence community and the corresponding weaponization of the national security establishment against a sitting president. As I shall show, such actions are treasonous on their face, and the extent to which this conduct has permeated the intelligence community and its peripheral functions of government, including the National Security Council and Congress itself, will only be known if and when an investigation is conducted into what, in retrospect, is nothing less than a grand conspiracy by those ostensibly tasked with securing the nation to instead reverse the will of the American people regarding who serves as the nation's chief executive. The key to this narrative is the whistleblower himself. Understanding who he is and what role he has played in these events surrounding the fateful 25 July telephone conversation are essential to unraveling the various threads of this controversy. After graduating Yale in 2008 with a degree in Russian and East European Studies, postgraduate study at Harvard, and work experience with the World Bank, the so-called whistleblower went through the CIA's 4-month career analyst program and was assigned to the Office of Russian and Eurasian Analysis, OREA, in the CIA's Directorate of Intelligence. This was the period of the so-called reset under Obama's Russia advisor, Michael McFaul, who was trying to manipulate differences between then Russian President Medvedev and Prime Minister Putin. When Putin returned to the Russian presidency in 2012, this group began to plan what became the 2014 fascist coup in Ukraine. It is clear that the whistleblower was in the center of the coup planning since in July 2015 as a very young man, a kid really. He was detailed to the NSC staff at the Obama White House as a director for Ukrainian affairs. Such NSC positions were intended for senior analysts at the GS-15 civil service level, but the whistleblower was given a waiver to assume the post as a GS-13. His candidacy had to have been approved both by Peter Clement, director of OREA, and CIA director John Brennan. In this position, the whistleblower reported to Charles Kupchan, senior director for European affairs at the NSC, who reported directly to Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice. His arrival at the White House coincided with the start of the Trump candidacy. Like everyone on the White House staff, the whistleblower was shocked by Trump's electoral victory in November of 2016. Susan Rice was alarmed by activities of the Trump transition team. She closely monitored the investigation into so-called Russian interference in the election and began to order the unmasking of the identities of Trump-related Americans in foreign intercepts. When UAE Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed visited New York to meet with Trump transition officials amidst rumors that he could be a Trump-backed channel to Russia, Rice ordered unmasking of intelligence reports pertaining to that visit. A principal NSC staffers who would logically have advised her were Kupchan, the whistleblower, and his close friend Sean Misko, NSC director for the Gulf state. Thereafter, Rice ordered near continuous unmasking of intelligence reports involving Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, logically advised by the same group. When McMaster replaced Flynn, fired because of leaks in which the whistleblower probably had a part, McMaster tried to restore the NSC functioning to that under Obama. Then when Fiona Hill arrived in April 2017 to be NSC director for Russia and Europe, a whistleblower was out of a job. But instead of returning him to CIA, McMaster hired him as his personal assistant and moved him from the old executive office building down the street into the White House, giving him direct access to everything that crossed McMaster's desk. Yet the White House refused the usual one-year extension to his two-year NSC assignment in July of 2017. So the whistleblower returned to CIA. Soon after he left, full transcript of Trump's January 28, 2017 conversation with the leaders of Mexico and Australia were leaked to the press. While some of his NSC colleagues believed the whistleblower was behind the leaks, McMaster refused to authorize a formal investigation, which could have ended the whistleblower's career at CIA. Nevertheless, despite having left under a cloud of suspicion, the whistleblower was rehired as NSC Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Russia and Eurasia in June of 2018, right back at the center of Ukraine policy. How unusual. Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats would have approved the appointment. Once back at the NSC, the whistleblower developed professional relationships with the new director for Ukraine at the NSC, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, with whom he appeared to share concern over Trump's views on Russia and Ukraine. As a witness, Vindman said he shared concerning aspects of Trump's July 25, 2019 Ukraine call with an authorized intelligence community contact, but Representative Schiff refused to allow any discussion of that person's identity, strongly suggesting it was the whistleblower. After being informed of the call, the whistleblower began preparing notes and assembling information and made many calls to U.S. government officials whom he knew from his official work, using a computer system approved for handling classified data. Then he began discussions with Representative Schiff's House Intelligence Committee staffers. That staff included two NSC veterans, one of them, the whistleblower's friend, Sean Misko. From there, he went on to the lawyers group Whistleblower Aid. One of its founders, Mark Zaid, had tweeted, "Coup has started as one false two more will take their place," in January of 2017. Representative Schiff has moved from insisting on the whistleblower's testimony to refusing to allow him testify even in closed session. No doubt because he wants to avoid legitimate questions Republicans might ask. Namely, what was a Deputy National Intelligence Officer of the U.S. intelligence community doing investigating activities of a sitting president? Who, if anyone, authorized this intervention in U.S. domestic political affairs by a CIA official? How did the whistleblower, who had a history of documented animosity with the Trump administration, including credible allegation of leaking sensitive material to the press for the express purpose of undermining the credibility of the president, get selected to serve as a Deputy National Intelligence Officer? Who signed off on that assignment? What was the precise role played by the whistleblower in unmasking the identities of U.S. citizens in 2016 during the Trump transition? There is, however, the major issue looming in the background of this impeachment frenzy: the intervention by elements of the intelligence community in the domestic political affairs of the United States. There is no question that the whistleblower's complaint served as a genesis of the ongoing impeachment proceedings. This is very serious stuff, Scott. I think the author got it right and clears up the role of this whistleblower who was imported to run a coup against Trump, just as he appears to have run a coup against the then president of Ukraine.
Yeah, I think this is the most important story of the day and of the year and of the entire Trump presidency, because what you have is the Burisma Ukraine scandal and scam under Yanukovych's former regime, the Minister of Mineral Resources, who was giving the licenses to himself to tap into the oil reserves and natural gas. Yanukovych is overthrown by the Obama administration and Victoria Nuland in a coup d'etat like they had done in Libya. And when they overthrow the Ukrainian government, when they shoot and kill a bunch of people in Maidan using CIA contractors, then this guy in charge of Burisma turns and becomes an Obama fan. You know, when he hires people to run and hire Hunter Biden to sell to the new Obama administration. And that's how this whole thing started. So the Burisma and this whole Ukraine thing is the new George Soros Open Society scandal. This is the new Soros that needs to be exploited. Absolute corruption. And we're seeing this Ciaramella whistleblower figure very exhaustively in this analysis shown his historical route from progression, and it's very accurate. I was a GS level position government hiree. I started as a presidential or a political appointee under the president. This is the accurate transition. But what's striking to me, Jim, is the fact that Trump's traitors, McMaster and other traitors like Reince Priebus and other traitors that were around him, facilitated this whistleblower being maintained in the National Security Council, being brought over from the vice president's building, which is adjacent to the White House. McMaster pulled this kid out of the old executive office building, the vice president's building, and put him in the White House and made him his personal assistant. He made the devil himself his personal assistant. That tells you that the false prophet is McMaster in a symbolic way.
Yes, McMaster is a major traitor. I cannot believe it. This is disgusting. He was brought in with such fanfare and praise, and he betrayed his oath, his responsibilities to the Constitution and to the President of the United States. Damn McMaster.
Damn him to hell. That son of a bee is the one who stabbed Trump in the back. And all of those other leaks, Jim, this whole thing now needs to be scrutinized and examined at the highest levels of the law enforcement, the intelligence, and the Senate, because all of the other leaks that were involving other conversations with other foreign officials, heads of state, all of this seemed to be coming out from the same cabal, the same group. McMaster is as guilty as the whistleblower himself because he hired him and he refused to do an investigation of him when all of this was coming out, which means McMaster was doing this by implication. So all of these leaks, all of these exposés, we saw also the unmasking of Americans by Susan Rice.
Yes.
That is a part of the coordinated strategy of leaks and undermining the president and exposing foreign heads so foreign countries won't have anything to do or talk to him. And it's treason. It's information warfare. And it's operational security. You've got a spy in your own house. I mean, Trump would be within his will to bring in some Marines and frickin' grab these people and shoot them by cement walls in execution style because they were committing treason against the United States of America. They were undermining America's national security. That was Susan Rice. That was this whistleblower. That was H.R. McMaster. That was this whole operation of the CIA. And I think Ritter's analysis is his whole story is right on. I think this is a wonderful piece, and it needs to be fully exploited and developed and exposed all the more. This has to be brought up, and somebody needs to be in the Congress saying to Vindman, this is the other thing, Vindman and this whistleblower, both of them now need to be really exposed, and it needs to be said, Vindman, is the name of the person that you talked to someone named Ciaramella? That name has been bandying about. Is it Ciaramella? No member of Congress needs to fear seeing that whistleblower's name because they can say anything on the United States Congress floor. That's what the Constitution gives them. That's what we expect of people, especially in moments of national crisis, revolution, civil war, whatever you want to call it, right now. This is the moment of the explosion of the gunpowder box, this whole episode. You see all the treason, the conspiracy, the traitors in Trump's old midst, all of it culminating in this Ukrainian coup d'etat operation that they were doing. Jim?
And you see the profound corruption of the Obama administration from top to bottom. Barack Obama, Susan Rice, as tight as they could be. And this whole thing was just a monstrous betrayal of the trust of the public.
You know, is this guy a whistleblower or is he just a leaker and a
He's a
traitor?
leaker. He's a leaker. He's not a whistleblower.
right.
He's not a leaker
Fast
at all.
and
I
Furious
mean, he's
says
not a
things
whistleblower at all.
with Obama.
What
It's
are
all
you
bad.
are you
They're
talking
above
about?
any reproach. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Charamella is not a whistleblower. He is
Right.
a leaker. He is a traitor. He should be executed for treason. H.R. McMaster should be executed for treason, for aiding and abetting a traitor, a spy within the Trump White House. And Susan Rice should be executed for unmasking and doing it all maliciously and purposely for political coup d'etat reasons. You are attempting to overthrow, politically assassinate the president of the United
The
States.
complete
These people
lack,
should be executed.
the complete lack of ethics is just appalling, Scott. These are totally unprincipled. These are political cannibals. These are disgusting cretins. It's shocking when you begin to appreciate the full dimensions of what took place here. Trump was not exaggerating when he said this is the greatest political scandal in the history of the United States.
And the worst thing is the military, the Pentagon people that have played a part in this. That's why he needs to get ass-kicking, hard-charging, special operations people in plain clothes that love a fight, love to kill traitors, and love their commander-in-chief, and will go into the agencies, go into the White House, and grab these people by the balls, literally, put them up against a wall, and start dressing them down. I would do that with a relish. I don't back away. You would do that. Others who've had that military training, that's what we do. When you're in charge of a battalion of men and you get some ornery, rebellious types, what do? Do you go in and have a reasonable discussion? No, you go in there and drop them to the ground, kick them in the face, and tell them who's boss. That's the drill sergeant mentality, and that's what Trump needs around him to go in and start kicking the living daylights out of these people and exposing and driving these leaker Charamella types. This is not playtime. We've just seen what their whole game plan is. They're going to continue this sort of thing throughout the election forever. They will continue it beyond 2020 unless we go on the full attack and start hunting them down like bloodhounds after the diseased foxes they are. Go ahead.
Are these Democrat leaders really supporting and helping us, or are they following a deep state agenda? It looks like they're all sold out to that, and that seems to be okay with with the powers that be.
Here's a very revealing study about government subsidies provided by the state of Wisconsin under the Republican Governor Scott Walker to a Taiwan firm called Foxconn, where new research shows that these government subsidies don't work. This is a fascinating case study. A new study on government subsidies by George Mason University found Wisconsin's deal with Foxconn will not work and could reduce economic activity in southeastern Wisconsin. Researchers with the Virginia-based Mercatus Center at the university focused on the Foxconn deal because of its size and high profile. Its study, The Economics of a Targeted Economic Development Subsidy, George Mason researchers found targeted subsidies are more likely to diminish rather than enhance economic prosperity in communities that offer them. Researchers based their study on the $3.6 billion in state incentives, taking into account the $3 billion incentive package approved by the GOP-controlled state legislature in 2017, and an additional $600 million in utility road training programs and economic development programs needed for the project. In 2017, the village of Mount Pleasant and Racine County created a special financing district to pay for a $764 million investment to support the Foxconn project. The investment has since been increased to $911 million, nearly $1 billion. Wisconsin is pretty much already on the hook for over $1 billion in subsidies if Foxconn were to leave tomorrow. The only question is, how much further does it go, said Michael Farron, an economist and head researcher of the study. Emails to Republican legislative leaders and Governor Tony Edwards, who's a Democrat who wasn't involved in this, were not returned. The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, which played a major role, did not respond to a request for comment by the deadline. Assembly Minority Leader Gordon Hintz, Democrat of Oshkosh, said legislators knew large subsidies often don't pay off when Foxconn was being debated. I think there was an appetite for a smaller investment, but the scale of this, even under the best case scenario, had a 25-year payback. And of course, the project has changed, and it looks like the best case scenario has been made much worse, Hintz said. It comes at a time and reaffirms what we know. But the fact that Wisconsin went well and above what traditional incentives are, I think that put us in an even worse position. A recent state audit found on average firms receiving Wisconsin subsidies create only about 34% of the promised jobs, or 1 in 3. Among its many findings, George Mason University researchers found the Taiwan-based electronics manufacturing company could have come to Wisconsin even without an incentive package. And job goals can hamper economic development. Local talent, resources, and CEO preferences are often the reason a company chooses its location, not the subsidy being offered, the study found. For the typical subsidy only matters between 2 and 25% of the time. Foxconn is not as easy to pinpoint. Its large LCD manufacturing display facilities around the world have been massively subsidized by local and national government. Wisconsin is probably the best place to locate because of its access to water resources and other utilities, and the fact that Wisconsin already has a 0% corporate income tax for manufacturing firms. Proponents of targeted economic development policies often argue they can create industry clusters. In Foxconn's case, Wisconsin officials have been discussing Wisconn Valley for 2 years, but the study found specialization should be a natural course to be efficient, using market signals. Subsidies can encourage a firm to ignore its or its region's natural competitive advantage, oblivious of what economists have called regional realisms, the study found. Consider this fanciful but feasible alternative. The $3.6 billion in subsidies that Wisconsin promised Foxconn could instead have built 7 square miles of greenhouses to motivate orange growers to move from Florida. If Wisconsin was the right place for LCD manufacturing firms, I would argue that they would probably already be locating there. The study also aimed to quantify the cost of the subsidy, looking at the $3.6 billion that could be paid to Foxconn over 15 years if all job goals are met. The study contends the subsidy represents just over 1% of all tax revenue Wisconsin is expected to receive over the next 15 years. If instead Wisconsin were to decrease its taxes by 1%, the state would see $20 billion more in economic development. The study also argues attaching subsidies to job goals incentivizes a company to continue on a path that might no longer be economically viable. Farron said this has already happened with Foxconn. The company originally was going to build large flat screens with a so-called Gen 10.5 plant, generation 10.5, meaning the stage of development. Foxconn said market change had prompted the company to shift to a smaller Gen 6 facility, already dated technology, no longer cutting edge. In early 2019, Foxconn executive hedged briefly on whether they would be doing any manufacturing in the state at all. Now they say the Gen 6 facility will begin operating in late 2020. If it doesn't make sense to build LCD displays in the US or even in southeastern Wisconsin, then it shouldn't be done, Farron said. And if you try to force something to happen, you're going to end up with more economic waste. Foxconn's 1 million square foot manufacturing plant is currently under construction in Mount Pleasant. The company has remained committed that it will create 13,000 jobs in Wisconsin. But it turns out they're planning to hire many from Northern Illinois instead. The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation will receive a report from Foxconn on December 31st to determine whether the company qualifies for state tax credits. This has been an unmitigated disaster. Many of us were opposed to it at the time. And it's not working out well for Wisconsin or the taxpayers or the public interest. Scott.
Well, the federal government has no business trying to develop Wisconsin land or people or
This
culture.
is state. This is state government.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Well, I mean, and often these state governments are getting combined loans or grants or federal government involvement financially. But again, anytime you have governments, even any government state trying to do anything in economic development, trying to do anything in these areas, it is always going to end and flatly fall apart because bureaucrats have no competency or vested interest in the benefits of the society. They have only their desire for their own job and their own virtue. These things have to be organically developed and erected within the private sector, faith-based communities of the land and the people where it's established, and with clear profit in order to motivate human nature to perform these things. And this whole thing looks just corrupt. Jim?
Yeah, Don, did you care to comment?
No comment.
As a Wisconsin resident, I've been just mortified by all of this. They just reeked of corruption. Meanwhile, Doug Bando has written, Trump must understand if war with Iran would be hell. The entire Middle East could go up in flames. 16 years ago, the George W. Bush administration manipulated intelligence to scare the public into backing an aggressive war against Iraq. The smoking gun mushroom clouds that National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice warned about didn't exist, but the invasion, long desired by neoconservatives and other hawks, proceeded nonetheless. Liberated Iraqis rejected U.S. plans to create an American puppet state on the Euphrates, and the aftermath turned into a humanitarian and geopolitical catastrophe, which continues to roil the Middle East to this day. Thousands of dead Americans, tens of thousands of wounded and maimed U.S. personnel, hundreds of thousands of dead Iraqis, and millions of Iraqis displaced. There was a sectarian conflict, destruction of the historic Christian community, the creation of al-Qaeda in Iraq, which morphed into the far deadlier Islamic State with a little help from Hillary Clinton and her friends, and the enhanced influence of Iran. The prime question was, how could so many supposedly smart people be so dumb? Now the Trump administration appears to be following the same well-worn path. The president has fixated on Iran, tearing up the nuclear accord with Tehran and declaring economic war upon Iran, as well as anyone dealing with it. He is pushing America toward war, even as he asserts that he wants peace. How stupid does he think we are? Naturally, the administration blames Iran for not accepting its supposedly generous offer to talk. However, Iran has no reason to believe that Washington is serious. One doesn't have to be a hardline Shiite Ayatollah to see little point in negotiating with a president seemingly determined on surrender or war, and who can't be counted on to keep any agreement he makes in any case. Indeed, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently proposed talks without preconditions other than that Iran needed to behave as a normal state and accede to Washington's many impossible demands even before sitting down at the negotiating table. National Security Advisor John Bolton later explained the president was prepared to talk about the future, but only after Iran gave up their nuclear and other unacceptable activities. In other words, Iran needed to surrender first. The United States would not negotiate under such circumstances. Why would Iran? The Iranian regime is malign. I doubt that myself. Nevertheless, despite being under almost constant siege, it has survived longer than the U.S. crafted dictatorship which preceded the Islamic Republic. And the latter did not arise in a vacuum. Washington did much to encourage a violent extremist revolution in Tehran. The average Iranian could be forgiven for viewing America as a virulently hostile power, determined to do his or her nation ill at almost every turn. Rather than continue a military spiral upward, Washington should defuse Gulf tensions. The administration brought the Middle East to a boil. It can't calm the water. Washington should stand down its military, offering to host multilateral discussions with oil-consuming nations, energy companies, and tanker operations over establishing shared naval security in sensitive waterways, including the Middle East. Given America's growing domestic energy production, the issue no longer should be considered Washington's responsibility. Other wealthy industrialized states should do what is necessary for their economic security. The administration should also make a serious proposal for talk. It won't be easy. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, declared, negotiation has no benefit and carries harm. He further argued, negotiations are a tactic of this pressure, which is the ultimate strategic aim. Even President Hassan Rouhani rejected contact without a change in U.S. policy. Whenever they lift the unjust sanctions and fulfill their commitments and return to the negotiating table, which they left themselves, the door is not closed, he said in back-channel discussions. Iranians have suggested that the U.S. reverse the latest sanctions, at least on oil sales, ending attempts to wreck its economy. If the president seriously desires talks with Iran, then he should demonstrate he does not expect preemptive surrender. The administration should suspend its maximum pressure campaign and propose multilateral tax on tightening the nuclear agreement in return for additional American and allied concessions, such as further sanctions relief. Meanwhile, cross our red lines and be destroyed. Iran's elite, the Revolutionary Guard chief, warns the U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia at a large pro-government rally. All external foes will be defeated if they make moves against Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commander warned at a massive pro-government rally amid protests over fuel price hikes. Major General Hossein Salami addressed people in downtown Tehran. He said the country's rivals are no longer capable of anything in their attacks against the nation. We have shown patience toward the hostile moves of America, the Zionist regime, Israel, and Saudi Arabia against the Islamic Republic of Iran, but we will destroy them if they cross our red line. Thousands have marched on the streets of the country's capital and gathered on the Irkwan Square, Revolution Square, calling themselves supporters of the leadership. The demonstrators waved national flags, carried placards, and chanted slogans in support of the supreme leader, Khomeini, and the current government. Some were also seen burning American flags. The rally is meant to denounce anyone who wants to create insecurity in the country, one demonstrator told the state-run news agency. Foreign Ministry spokesman Mobas Mousavi said the demonstration allows the foreign states to see who the real people in Iran are and what they are saying. Iran has been hit by protests in various parts of the country after the government, under pressure from U.S. sanctions, began to ration fuel and approved a hike on fuel prices in hope the additional revenue could be used for subsidies for poor families. Amid peaceful demonstrations, some angry mobs also torched banks and department stores, as well as attacked police stations, killing several officers. The authorities said there were dead and injured among the protesters as well. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, I was in Iran, Jim, in 2018 with Michael Maloof and Phil Giraldi and Kevin Barrett and J. Michael Springman and E. Michael Jones and a lot of Michaels and a lot of other people from Australia to New Zealand to Ireland. I was there with a conference, the New Horizons Conference, and we found a very polite, respectful, sophisticated, intelligent people. We didn't see savagery and violence and screaming in the streets. We weren't in danger. There weren't protests. There was nothing disruption. I went out many times and had a team of photographers with me, and I went right into the country. I went to a big floral flower stadium. It was like a fair that they have once a year, and I went by. I'm the only white American that's walking around throughout New Zealand, throughout Iran, and of course I'm walking with a bearing, and I'm confident. I keep my head in a swivel, but I never once encountered anything. I never encountered hostility. I never encountered a foul look. I never encountered anything. I remember a little boy looking up at me and talking with his eyes going white, and the translator said, you know, this is an American with us, and his eyes go, American, and he said, aren't they at war with us? And you know, I just looked at the little boy and I smiled and I nodded, and I thought, God, it's terrible we're in these positions, because these are like people from India. They're not the savage Wahhabi lunatics. You don't have women in full-on burqas. Women had their heads covered and headscarves, but they were you know, wearing dresses, and it was a good society. And I remember meeting political figures there. I remember meeting people you know, in high-level intelligence groups that were giving us briefings on 9/11 and what was going on in Lebanon and Syria, and how bad guys were being channeled from Syria to Afghanistan. I mean, we were getting some pretty interesting intel, and it was a promising situation, because we're trying to develop bridges for the president, and he's followed, I think, some of the worst advisors and the worst advice. Now we probably see a lot of that by McMaster and these other people. They really had it out for the president. They were trying to put him into a corner and damage him, and they have. They've damaged him because they've put him into a tar pit, and he's got nowhere to go. He's got to walk out of it. He's got to walk backwards, because the Iranian situation is probably the worst foreign policy blunder and debacle and problem and mistake that he's made, because it didn't have to go this way. And the Iranians are not a subservient, passive, submissive people. They're Persians. They've undergone 40, 50 years, 60 years of political enslavement and pressure by the British, by the United States, the coup d'etat in 1953, the removal of Mossadegh, the planting of the Shah, the removal of the Shah, the Cold War that has been going on ever since. They're not going to bow down and change, and they have only themselves to rely upon. So they're you know, when they shut the door and say close for business until you get a better attitude, they mean it. And yeah, they may go through hardship. And you've seen some CIA operations trying to stir up protests that have been squelched and have gone nowhere. I don't think they're going to bow and change. And President Trump really needs to pick his battles and recognize that Iran and Russia and China are being forced to collaborate and create an alliance that will not bode well for the United States. So he's got to peel them away. He's got to peel them away from China, because China is the big threat. China is the enemy of the United States. It's the enemy of the American people. The Iranian people are not the enemy of Americans. Neither are the Russians. But he needs to really choose his battles wisely and get off of this endless war campaign. It's not going to survive. He's not going to be able to, I think, break this nation. And you know, in 2020, he really needs to adopt a more intelligent position and get away from the Israeli Zionist plan, the Atlantic Council plan of endless war, because it's not going to work. And he also needs to get away from this idea of keeping the oil. I've heard him say that, and it's always like fingernails down a chalkboard. I don't think any American wants to keep the oil or have a sense of we're going into other countries and keeping their oil. It's one thing to be invited. It's one thing to go in as a business deal. It's one thing to do it with a contract and an agreement, but it's something entirely different morally when you invade a country and steal and take and kill their people and take their oil or anything else from them. That makes the Americans no longer a patriotic light on a hill. It makes them a black pirate flag ship going around and slitting the throats of countries and stealing their property. And it's a transformation of America that I think is gonna blow back and harm the president, because Democrats could say very easily, and Tulsi Gabbard has kind of said this, we need to stop these regime change and stop stealing countries' oil. And the vast majority of Americans agree with her. And Trump can't afford to have anybody agree with Tulsi Gabbard or Democrats on war or the Middle East policy or strategy, because that's going to make or break him. people are going to say, we have had enough of all of these activities in the Middle East. You promised to get us out, and if you're lying to us or you're not going to do it, we're just going to pick our ball and bat up and go with someone else, because at the end of the day, this is really the only thing that matters, because this is put us to the brink of losing our domestic rights based on this endless forest fire you're starting all over the world. Jim?
I think you're right, Scott. It's the greatest blunder of his administration. Here we have the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, a member, accusing the organization of manipulating the report on the alleged chemical attack in the Syrian city of Douma. It's very specific and detailed about what was happening here, where they claimed that they had cylinders that were allegedly dropped from planes, but there was no evidence they'd been dropped from planes. The email's author said the samples they analyzed were in contact with a chemical that contained a chlorine atom, which could have come from any number of sources, and yet nevertheless they said it had to be chlorine gas. In other words, this was a case of being very selective about the evidence they cited. Describing the levels as high overstates the extent of the levels of chlorinated organic derivatives detected. They are in most cases only in parts per billion, as low as 1 to 2, which is essentially trace quantities. What he's saying is they fabricated their report, and it cannot have been inadvertent. Email is a second leak from an OPCW member related to the alleged Douma attack. An unrelated engineer report was leaked to the Working Group on Syria Propaganda and Media earlier this year, where the Syrian liberals claimed the cylinders the engineering team examined were dropped out of a Syrian government aircraft. The unreleased document does not corroborate that story, however. The leaked engineering report concluded at this stage the FFM, the fact-finding mission engineering sub-team, cannot be certain the cylinders at either location arrived there as a result of being dropped from an aircraft. The engineering team, in fact, suspected the cylinders were manually placed at the scene. In summary, observations at the scene of the two locations, together with subsequent analysis, suggests there's a higher probability both were manually placed rather than delivered from aircraft. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces killed 28 protesters after the Iranian consulate in Iraq is torched. Protesters stormed Iranian consulate in Najaf. Anti-government protests began in October. Commander says he'll protect the Shiite Muslim authorities. Consulate attack shows intense anti-Iranian sentiment. I'm convinced this is all worked up and staged by the CIA. I have no doubt about it. Iraqi security forces shot dead at least 28 protesters after demonstrators stormed and torched an Iranian consulate. At least 24 people died when troops opened fire on demonstrators who blocked a bridge. 4 others were killed in Baghdad. The incidents marked one of the bloodiest days since the uprising began, with what are supposed to be anti-corruption demonstrations that have since swelled into a revolt against authorities. Scorned by young demonstrators as stooges of Tehran. I don't believe this for a second. All the riot police in Najaf and the security forces started shooting at us as if we were burning Iraq as a whole. The protester witnessed the burning of the consulate, told Reuters. Another protester described the attack on the consulate as a brave act and reaction from the Iraqi people. We don't want the Iranians. Scott, I'm troubled by this because I think it's elaborate to force out the prime minister, who's a very good man. In fact, I believe the second story, next one, relates to that. Let me begin with this first. We had the alleged bridge hoax in London terrorist attack before an election. A guy with a knife is supposed to have murdered 2 people, shot dead by the police. But look at this. We have video of his miraculous resurrection. This is the alleged dead man. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous what happens here. He sits right up. This guy is supposed to be dead, shot dead by the police, and he sits right up. Watch it again. Here it comes. Not a miracle, just one more staged attack. Meanwhile, the Iraqi PM says he'll resign after the weeks of violent protests. And this appears to have been what it was all about. This guy's been very independent, very even-handed. He wants to use Iraqi resources for the Iraqi people. He doesn't want there to be foreign interference in Iraq. I think that the CIA felt he was a handful and they had to get rid of him, and they've staged these. There is the Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani, however, has urged Parliament to consider withdrawing its report for the PM Abdul Mahdi's government to stem spiraling violence. Meanwhile, security forces shot dead at least 3 people. Iraqi forces have killed nearly 400. The burning of Iran's consulate in Najaf has escalated. The unrest is Iraq's biggest crisis in years. It pits protesters from Shia heartlands in Baghdad in the south against a corrupt Shia-dominated ruling elite seen as pawns of Iran. Why they should be seen as pawns of Iran is beyond me. I don't think there's any warrant for this. Iran's current political class is drawn mainly from powerful Shia politicians, clerics, and paramilitary leaders, including many who lived in exile before the U.S. invasion overthrew the Sunni dictator Saddam Hussein. Sistani only weighs in times of crisis, but wields huge influence over public opinion, warned on Friday against an explosion of civil strife and tyranny. He urged government forces to stop killing protesters and told demonstrators to reject all violence. It was quite a brilliant interview that Kevin Barrett gave with Press TV, explain the virtues of this man who is clearly an Iranian nationalist and a formidable political mind who knows the right moves to make. I'm convinced, Scott, they had to get rid of him because he wasn't playing the game, that he wasn't deferring to Western interests on oil, politics, and other issues of the U.S.
Yeah, I think they are trying to disrupt Iraq into, again, all sorts of chaos and civil war to provide a buttress or influence into Iran, whether to totally try and replace Iraq in order to build that highway towards Iran. This is the part of the whole Zionist agenda, is to continue to break up these Middle Eastern countries into a bunch of little Indian tribes that hate each other. So you have the Sioux fighting the Blackfeet fighting the Apache fighting the Mohawk, and on in the tribal sense. So that's the Zionist agenda, to disintegrate these countries so that Israel can have its expansion project.
Yes. When I said CIA, I should have included the Mossad, of course, because this is the Zionist program. Absolutely, yeah, Scott.
It is, and I would say, I don't think it's going to win, because you are going to see Iraq. It's very easy for them to separate along ethnic, religious lines, and Iran. It's not just the Iranian nation; it's that entire geography where you have the Shia that are in this. I mean, if you get rid of the national borders, you suddenly just see this massive area of land that includes Iran, Pakistan, and parts of Iraq, where you have the Shia concentrations. It's very easy for them to say, this is our real national boundary, and they're not gonna bow or change to international fences. I would say finally too, Tucker Carlson did a story, Jim. That's the most significant thing about the OPCW accused of manipulating the Syrian chemical attack. We know it was false. We knew it from the beginning. We knew Senator Black went over there and has talked about this as well. There was no chemical attack, and now it's being exposed as a fraud. CIA would have been involved with this, MI6, Mossad most likely as well. And Tucker Carlson having this story saying we were lied to. He had a reporter on there from, I think it was The Guardian or The Intercept or something. No, I think it was it was some British paper. And the reporter went through all the details. But it's very significant that Tucker Carlson was the only one who said this whole chemical attack was a fraud, and it's now being proven as such. So Donald Trump, who listens to Tucker Carlson, is well aware that he has enemies and liars in his own administration. The British are not an ally. The British have been the ones who have been working against him. The LaRouche organization are very well documented in exposing the British role in specifically, I'd say, the English. I don't like to include the Scottish in the English pedophile corruptions of the crown, but the British and the English, the United Kingdom has been undermining the president all along, and this is one of the greatest examples. Was this false Syrian chemical attack that the president was duped into launching a counterstrike on? Jim?
Agreed completely.
Sounds like our FEMA group.
Amnesty International is claiming that Facebook, Google are abusing human rights because of their massive surveillance program. This is a London-based global rights group in a 60-page report that the business model of what called the surveillance giants is inherently incompatible with the right to privacy. Google and Facebook likewise threaten a range of other rights, including freedom of expression and the right to equality and non-discrimination. The report said that the company's practice of vacuuming up personal data to feed various advertising businesses is an unprecedented assault on privacy rights. The ubiquitous surveillance has undermined the very essence of the right to privacy. In a 5-page report, Facebook disagreed, claimed that, in fact, their model is disputed, that it was surveillance-based, and noted users sign up voluntarily for the service, which is nominally free, though data collected is used to sell ads. But we all know now that Facebook was a creation of the CIA, and Mark Zuckerberg was brought in to be the face, but it's been brilliantly successful beyond their wildest expectations. We also have a new poll showing that social media are regarded as a source of information for most Americans, but they don't know what they can believe. They don't know what source is trustworthy. This is a really rather fascinating story. Today, Julie Ferguson, an occupational therapist, for example, remembers getting TV news from a handful and grew up watching Walter Cronkite. Now she gets a lot of her news for the social media, but doesn't know what to trust. 54% say they get government-related information from social media at least once a day. Others from local TV, from national, from cable, nationally circulated newspapers. The key is just not knowing. I think the key is on the internet, you get both sides. From the mainstream media, only one. And almost certainly when it's a politically sensitive issue, what the mainstream is telling you is propaganda and disinformation. I move forward to the final story. Americans simply can't afford lawyers anymore. In America, legal counsel is not guaranteed in civil cases the way it is in criminal. And with the sky-high cost of lawyers across the country, it's increasingly leading to a two-tiered justice system, those who can afford counsel and those who cannot. More and more Americans are now representing themselves. Just 1 in 4 civil defendants represented by counsel, down from nearly all defendants having lawyers in 1992. In other words, now it's gone from 100% to 25%, according to a 2015 study. And it's probably even dropped since then. An opportunity for justice is the bedrock of the American legal system, but pro se litigants up against attorneys are unlikely to win their cases or settle on beneficial terms. Trish McAllister, head of the Texas Access to Justice Commission, said, "It's really a crisis. People aren't able to get into the courts and they're not able to navigate them once they are there. Most civil cases usually are about debt collection, landlord-tenant disputes, home foreclosures. Lawyers will build their cases around litigants' inexperience and inability to hire competent counsel." Terry Lawson, a legal aid attorney in Missouri, said, "These guys know they're going to win. Their hope of hopes is nobody will get lawyers." It's not always about winning or losing in civil cases. Sylvana Nagub, an attorney at Public Counsel, California pro bono law firm, commented, "Lawyers can help negotiate better settlement. There's a stark difference between the agreement signed by self-representing litigants versus what I get for clients. Courts have very little mercy for litigants who represent themselves. Some offer resources like volunteers or on-lord forms, but judges are required to hold pro se litigants to the same standard as those with counsel. Here's a case where a court rejected a litigant's motion for a continuance so she could prepare her case, but a month later approved the other side's continuance so the lawyer could take a vacation. There's still ongoing efforts to help litigants who can't afford counsel. An organization called Civil Gideon is trying to expand the right to counsel to cover civil disputes. They were backed by the American Bar Association in 2006, but there remain questions of who would pay for it. I can just certify based on my own experience that my lack of counsel was a serious disadvantage. Truth, after all, is today an absolute defense against defamation. But in the 18th century, Lord Mansfield held the greater the truth, the greater the liability. In my case, they didn't even prove that I was negligent. Therefore, the finding of responsibility on my part was invalid. It's a Wisconsin and federal law. You can't find liability without fault. They never found fault. Fortunately, I have an attorney now who will carry the case forward. They also introduced irrelevant and prejudicial testimony regarding contempt, where I was convinced that the party who appeared for the video oral deposition was not the party whose picture had appeared worldwide. The judge found me in contempt for sharing it with two parties I thought could serve as impeachment witnesses, and I was fined $7,000. There was no proof of incitement in my trial for damages, no causal changes, so the sentences I published in the book had anything to do with the alleged post-traumatic stress or other activities they claimed were incited, including even actions by Alex Jones or by a woman named Lucy Richards, who have never read the book, know nothing about it. It violated also both First Amendment and public policy grounds because in my role as a journalist, I surely ought to have the right to report the results of my collaborative research. A publication for lawyers called Minnesota Lawyers was entitled Lawyers Help Sandy Hook Dad Prevail. Defamation defendant accused him of faking his son's death certificate, except I never made that allegation. I said the death certificate was a fabrication, not that Leonard Posner had faked it. Ron Avery has a brilliant piece on it on my blog, Minnesota Lawyers Help Sandy Hook Plaintiff Prevail. Then you could get the basic documents at my blog, the Sandy Hook Posner versus Fetzer lawsuit, including the complaint, the oral hearing transcript, the order of the court, and the two reports of the forensic document examiners, both of whom concluded that the death certificate I had described as a fabrication was a fabrication, and indeed that three other versions that had surfaced during the course of the trial were also fabrications, which the court merely set aside in rendering its verdict, which was completely improper. The judge was violating the law in rendering his determination at the summary judgment. Even the Yale Daily News got it wrong, and indeed, they couldn't even have the title right. Here, look, at the man here who appeared for the oral hearing, is that the same man? Finally, if you have any interest in supporting my case, go to jamesfetzer.com and check out the options. Don, I know we're done for today. York, take us out.
Yeah, looks like this is it, folks. Thank you so much for watching Truth versus News for December 2nd. And I guess that's about all the time we have, so I'm just going to sign off here. Thanks again for watching, sure, and we appreciate your watching. God bless.